it's Alison and Albert from Real Employment Law Advice bringing you our second coffee chat about things that are going on in the world of employment law lately. You may have seen our last one on YouTube, and we thought we'd try and do it again. And this time we're going to be talking about returning to work and what you do in terms of preparing staff who are furloughed, and the steps you need to take, or what we think you need to take, really, because there isn't anything currently set out in law about how you bring them back, and it's obviously new to everybody. So hopefully you'll find this helpful. So morning, Albert.
Morning, Ali.
And we've sort of had a brief chat before about returning from work from furlough, because a couple of our customers have asked us about it. So what are the kind of things you think employers should be considering, Albert, when they're bringing staff back?
Okay, so just as a reminder, just as you just said, there isn't any time frame for this, really. The job retention scheme is due to end at the end of June, although there are calls for it to be extended. So this is just planning ahead as far as you can. So in terms of planning, I think of it as two different angles. You have the legal side of it, and then you have perhaps the softer side about how you are actually going to operate in practice. So in terms of the legal side, employers should be thinking about how they are selecting which employees and staff members to come back, and to make sure that that is as inclusive as possible, and that those decisions are not made on any unfair basis or discriminatory basis.
Yeah, because some employers may have gone through the exercise at the start of deciding who to furlough if they only did half, but you could find that you're in a situation where you've furloughed all of your staff but actually only need to bring a few back. So absolutely reconsidering how you make that decision.
Yeah, it's not necessarily just a straightforward let's pull them all back in. There might be, there's going to be commercial considerations about the roles that you can actually do, and that crosses over into the softer aspects. So in terms of the other parts of it, you need to think about how much notice you might need to give your staff for them to actually come back. So what date you want your office or workplace to reopen, at a time you need to give your staff members who are furloughed knowledge of when they're due to come back. And I think we're going to talk about that a bit later on. Then there's the health and safety aspects of the legal side. I'm not a health and safety expert, but you have a duty to try and protect the health and well-being of your staff. And that is a significant and ongoing duty when they come back. So that carries on neatly into perhaps the softer side in terms of how you're actually going to operate as normal. So businesses need to think about their offices. Can you social distance at work? I know our offices is probably going to be quite difficult in ours to keep that 2 metre distance.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need to think about the kitchen, communal areas. How is that going to be managed? How do you keep that clean or as risk-free to staff members? And things that you might be thinking about are perhaps a staged return. So you split your staff members into group A and B on some way, and you stage their return gradually, or you have a staggered return, so maybe a staggered start date so that only a few people go into the kitchen at once when they get their coffee in the morning, and then the next people might come back or start a couple of hours later so that it can be cleaned and disinfected perhaps.
Yeah, so it's these kind of things that I think, even though we don't have any dates at the moment, I mean, obviously we're recording this on Monday the 4th of May, so we're hoping that by Thursday there'll be some guidance about timescales, but certainly employers need to start thinking about this, because undoubtedly the social distancing measures will need to continue, whether that's mandated by government or whether you consider that to be the health and safety protocol for your business. I think you need to be planning and looking at scenarios now, don't you, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And another important thing I think employers need to think about is when your staff do actually get back, your management team, there's going to be a psychological sort of perhaps fear and uncertainty for everyone coming back. It's going to be relatively new for everyone, and there's going to be these new, or maybe not new changes now, but in the workplace. And there is going to be an adjustment period of from furlough or returning to work, getting back to full normal operating. And so I think you need to think about the amount of time it's going to take for that, and for people to get back into the swing of things. And also, just generally, managers have to think about setting time aside to have one-to-ones for everyone coming back to work, and have that reinduction into the workplace, talk about their own personal circumstances, their personal experiences of what's happening, and everyone will be different, and that will take a bit of time to actually get through as well.
Yeah, and I think you should be doing the foundation work now, and absolutely, rather than just emailing employees, actually speaking to them, by telephone, but if you can, on something like we're using today, like Teams or Zoom, or something like that, so you get a flavour for which kind of camp they sit in. Because, talking to people, we talk to a lot of employers and employees, and we have been over this whole period, and they all fall into different camps. So on the one hand, I've had examples of employees who are desperate, absolutely desperate to return to work, whatever happens. One case, an employee who was given the shielding letter, who considers himself to be young, thin, healthy, but had the letter because of things that happened when he was younger, and he's desperate to return to work. And then on the other side of it, you get the people who are absolutely terrified of leaving the house, and the thought of going back to work makes them feel, extremely anxious and upset. So I think as a good manager, you need to assess and understand which of your staff fit into which kind of area before you make those sort of, arrangements for them to return, so that you can provide the reassurance where it's needed. And I don't know whether you think in making the decisions about who should return, you should bring that into your thinking. So aside from obviously the commercial reality and bringing back those people that you need for the business and to do the work, do you think it's wise for employers to say, okay, well, I know that they're really keen to work, and I know that they're really anxious, so we'll bring back those that are keen first, and I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I think it's definitely going to have an impact on people's decisions about what staff to bring back. I think employers probably shouldn't necessarily base their decision on that, really, but they should be sympathetic to what people want and their state of mind, yes. But if they can incorporate those, then great. But I think if not, there will have to be that period of reassurance and making sure you do have those, conversations with them to actually manage that as best as you can. If you can't, say, allow people who might be nervous, if you need them to come back, you have that conversation. That communication is key, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's all about having empathy, isn't it?
Yeah.
And understanding how people are feeling. And whilst you, as the manager or business owner, might be feeling under pressure and feeling stressed and thinking, well, we need you back because we need to start making money again, otherwise we're not going to have any jobs for anybody. Not letting that feeling that you have and that emotion you have about things tip over to your conversations with staff, isn't it? It's, taking yourself out of your position as the manager and putting yourself in the position of that person you're talking to. And that's where the best managers, get it right. The ones who sort of storm in there and say, well, I've been working all this time, we're not going to have any jobs, you better get back, I don't care what you think, are the ones that are going to run into difficulty, aren't they?
Yeah, and they're the ones who won't be able to retain the staff who do want to come back. And, most people will want to come back at some point. It's just going to be a matter of being empathetic and sympathetic to people's anxieties, which are understandable.
Yeah, Absolutely, and the point you make about keeping their staff in the long term is an important one. Again, I was talking to somebody on Friday who has received a sort of an ultimatum from their employer. They're owed some wages, some back pay that wasn't paid in March and April, and their employers basically said, unless you tell us you're willing to return to work, you'll be the bottom of the line for payments. And obviously the employees are in a difficult position at this stage, and they're obviously just going to go along and try and get their money back. But ultimately they've said, if this is how they behave over this, then there's no way we have a long-term future there, and we'll be looking to leave as soon as things, get better. So, employees will vote with their feet, and that's the biggest problem. Of course, they also have the legal risk. But I think many employees will think, if you can treat me like this in these circumstances, then I'm going to find someone who will treat me well.
Yeah, and that's what the planning perhaps is all about, is to give the business that time to assess and make its strategy and identify how they do keep the people as far as possible. And so that you can get back to where you were before.
Yeah, one of the main questions that we're being asked is, what notice do you need to give to bring someone back from furlough? So what are your views on that, Albert?
So hopefully everyone who has been furloughed, and who have been furloughed perhaps with our advice, should have a written agreement in place to confirm that they were designated as furloughed staff. And that written agreement should have given either a time frame or time period for that furlough, or if it was indefinite, a description of how much notice was to be given. So the starting point will be, what does that furlough agreement say in terms of the notice to be given? Many probably haven't got that written in that furlough agreement, and many businesses furloughed staff without actually any written agreement whatsoever. It was just simply, we have to do this to survive, and they weren't even thinking about coming back. So if that's the case, there isn't any set minimum period of notice by law which has to be given. Again, it's going to be the widely used legal term of reasonable notice, whatever that means. It's going to be, but maybe a good practice might be to give notice which allows the staff as much time as possible, because they'll have their own personal circumstances to organise, so childcare, returning to school, or arranging other childcare needs, or hospital treatment, for example. So reasonable notice, what that means, it's up to you in every single different circumstance.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think if I'm laying my hopes on having some idea about timescales at the end of this week, and hopefully we'll have some indication from the government. But I mean, either way, I think it's a good time, if you haven't already, to perhaps touch base with staff and send a further letter just confirming that the furlough is continuing and what you're going to do in terms of notice, so that employees have that understanding. So you can start thinking about it now and say, look, we'll give you as much notice as we can, but the minimum we're going to give you is a week, so we'll let you know as soon as we have any news about you returning, something like that, for example. Because it's about making sure employees understand, isn't it, what's happening. And a lot of the time, the lack of communication, again, is the thing that causes the most anxiety. And if they start hearing on the news, for example, at the end of the week, that there are going to be phases of getting out of lockdown, and perhaps one of the ideas that's being mooted is that there are different industries at different levels. Employees hear that on the news on Thursday, that their industry is going to be coming back, potentially in 2 or 3 weeks. They will start panicking, what's happening. Employers need to be on top of that and making sure that they're at the front and saying, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to work around the government timescales, and this is what you can expect from us.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to leave it so that employees or staff who are already anxious are listening to the news and making up their own stories and gossip and the grapevine, about what you're doing. You need to be on top of that, as you say, to make sure that you contact them and say, with as much certainty as you can, or just an update, what you're doing. And communication is the way to do it.
Yeah, and we talked a lot about maintaining contact, haven't we, and communication, and I suppose just emphasising there that the benefits of having a discussion rather than sending an email. Obviously, email communication is good. It can be quick and you can do it more regularly, but actual, picking up the phone and speaking to people is the most important thing, isn't it? And then one of the biggest questions I think is going to come out of this, and I think where we'll have the most calls, Albert, in the coming weeks, is what do you do if an employee says they don't want to return or they refuse, for various reasons? How can an employer handle that? And what do you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be very difficult because it is completely untested, but I think there's a couple of different scenarios. So we've mentioned people who are perhaps nervous about returning. Those you have to be sympathetic and empathetic about what and why they're nervous for. Talking to them is key, as we've said. You need to get to know why they are nervous and what they're nervous about, and make sure you can explain to them clearly what you're doing to protect their health and safety when they do come back. So that's from the planning stage. You can say, we've got this set up, that set up, and we're doing this. And incorporate and work within that as far as you can. If you have people who are shielding, so those who might be particularly vulnerable to the disease, that might go beyond the June deadline for the furlough. So you might, and you should start thinking about who of those employees might be able to work from home, or if you have to extend a furlough period. Now, that wouldn't necessarily be under the job retention scheme because that would have ended, maybe, but you could still financially support that if you could, or you make some other arrangements such as reduced hours or reduced pay in that time. Or you get them to come back to work and you reassure them through communication and planning about what you can do to make sure that they can still shield themselves at work as far as possible. And then I think you've got the final group maybe who perhaps are bereaved during this. I mean, realistically, there's going to be relatively few, I suspect, certainly perhaps where we are, but there may be some. There may be some who have had a family or a friend suffer, and they will be particularly anxious about that. And unfortunately, there's no right to any particular leave for them necessarily attached to furlough, but again, you have to be sympathetic and empathetic to them, and then there might be some other ways that you could support them, so agreeing some extended leave, but it is going to be very personal to each staff member.
Yeah, absolutely. And that could be, like you say, it could be agreeing an additional leave or phased return to work, or providing bereavement counselling and support, all of those kind of things.
Yeah, so thinking about what other support you can give, those employee support programs, counselling, that will be necessary or potentially necessary for everyone. It's going to be a complete shock to a lot of people coming back, isn't it? And complete readjustment. It's not going to be as it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's understanding that, people have been through quite a lot of stress, no doubt, and their own journey through this thing. And, just suddenly expecting them to return to work on a Monday morning, back to normal full time, as if nothing's happened, is completely unrealistic.
Yeah.
I think ultimately, I was just thinking about this when you were talking about it, it's about being a human being and recognizing that it's from one human to another. And, you know, yes, you may be the manager, yes, you may be the business owner, but, you know, they're you know, every employee is a human with a story, with something going on at home, with their own view on the world, and just, yeah, keeping that in mind throughout. And, you know, even if that means, you know, you get your manager, if you've got a group of managers, you get them together and they can have their own sort of venting session where they get out how they feel about how staff are behaving, and that doesn't then reflect on how they then deal with them. Or if you're a business owner, meeting up with other business owners, or calling us and talking to us and explaining to us how frustrated you are, and making sure that, you know, that comes across to somebody else, but not to the staff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not all just what you have to do for your staff. You know, as a business owner, as you said, you're going to have so many concerns and anxieties about reopening and things like that. And yeah, speak to someone yourself to release that.
Yeah. So just to recap then, we're saying from a legal perspective, unless you've agreed a period of notice to bring them back to work, there is no minimum legal requirement. You are required to behave reasonably though, and there is this implied duty in the contract of trust and confidence that you behave in a reasonable manner. So keep that in mind. You do have obviously legal health and safety obligations that you need to adhere to. Then if you are bringing back some staff but not all, you need to think about how you're doing that, whether you're applying, you know, reasonable and fair selection criteria again for that, you know, avoiding discrimination, and you know, making somebody at a disadvantage because of a protected characteristic. And then finally, if employees do refuse to return, then we strongly recommend that you seek advice before taking any disciplinary action or dismissing them, because there are a number of things that you could fall foul of. Yes, employees do have an obligation to return under their contract, but there are so many things at the moment to consider. It's important to get advice, isn't it, Albert?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, don't do anything before getting advice.
And we have produced a letter which you can issue to staff, which brings the furlough period to an end. And we've produced a template that we're giving to our customers. So if anybody would like a copy of that who's watching this video, then you can get in touch with us and we'll happily send that to you to use. You can email either of us. It's Albert at Real Employment Law Advice or Alison at realemploymentlawsadvice.co.uk. And we also are putting some articles related to what we're talking about today on our website, which is the adviceforemployers.co.uk. So, of course, if you have any questions or you want any specific advice, then we're still here, we're still working, Albert in his kitchen and me in the office. So thanks very much. Thanks, Albert, it's been fab.
That's great, thank you.